The old cemetery of St. Nicholas, here at Castlelyons, Castlelyons, dates at least to the 14th century and was in use up until the early 1960s. All that now remains of the 14th century church is what appears to be the bell tower, which has two large Gothic doorways or windows. Above each arch is an ogee-headed window. The north-facing window is a double ogee head made of limestone. The east-facing window, however, is a single ogee head made of limestone and sandstone. The sheer height, build and style of the 14th century church is reminiscent of the bell tower of an abbey. The tower also displays on its eastern wall evidence of a gable end, and the remains of what would have been two walls, perhaps of adjoining rooms. This would imply that the chancel of the church would have been where the Barrymore mausoleum now stands, approximately. Therefore, it is fair to say that the mausoleum was in fact built inside the chancel of the old 14th century church. The western face of the wall bears no such evidence. However, built inside this wall and the north wall is the 18th century Church of Ireland chapel. The Church of Ireland chapel was built in 1771 and was in use up to the late 1950s or the early 1960s. The eastern wall of this church, the chancel, boasts a large switchline tracery window. According to local folklore, this window once was part of the earlier church and was removed sometime during the late 17th century, soon after the Church of Ireland chapel had been built. A large and beautifully ornamented Gothic archway separates the nave from the chancel in the eastern sector of the chapel. Unfortunately, it is now not possible to see the underground heating system of the chapel. In the southern eastern corner of the nave there is a chimney and cast iron grate where presumably the rector at the time lit a fire during service. The north wall of the chapel has two Gothic windows, while the southern wall has three. All five, unfortunately, are now blocked up. St. Nicholas graveyard itself has possibly some of the best examples of 17th century memorials in Munster. This is the Barrymore mausoleum here at Castlelyons graveyard, and the Earls of Barrymore, who was David, the first Earl, died in 1642. Richard II Earl died in 1694, followed by Lawrence the 3rd Earl, died in 1724. James the 4th Earl, who commissioned the mausoleum here in the graveyard, died in 1747, followed by Richard the 5th Earl, died in 1751. Richard the 6th Earl died in 1782. Richard the 7th Earl died in 1793. And finally, the 8th Earl, who happened to be Henry, died in 1823. Also dedicated to the Peart family is the south-facing mausoleum in this graveyard. The dates for this mausoleum are uncertain. However, it most likely to date to the 17th century at the earliest. During a recording module carried out some years ago in this graveyard, two headstones were found to date 1689. The oldest of these is a Georgian headstone, which is dedicated to Jane Thomas. The other headstone is dedicated to Sylvestra Jessup, and her daughter Sarah May. 2 table tombs were also discovered during the recording module in this cemetery, and those dated to the 17th century. The first of these is dedicated to the memory of the Vowell family of Castlelyons. The other tomb is dedicated to the Peard family, who were considered to be tyrannical landlords and who lived in Castlelyons during the 17th and the early 18th centuries. The earliest section recorded on this tomb dates to 1683. The graveyard here is both a Church of Ireland and Catholic graveyard. The majority of the Church of Ireland memorials are located in the northeast section of this graveyard, and most of them date to the early part of the 20th century. Most of these memorials take the form of plain crosses, gabled tombs and/or cross slabs. There are also a number of Church of Ireland graves in the southern sector of this graveyard. However, the majority of these are Catholic. The memorial types vary greatly. They can range from Celtic crosses to plain headstones and to table tombs. The majority of the headstones in this graveyard are, however, what was classed as shouldered or Georgian. It can be said that this old graveyard of St. Nicholas's here at Kilsandan in Castlelyons is steeped in history, and it is amongst one of the best examples of a 17th century cemetery in Munster. This cemetery has some fine examples of artwork and stone masonry, with every form inscription technique represented, and also a varied range of symbols and ornamentation that reflect the excellent craftsmanship. So if in the area, why not pay a visit to St. Nicholas's graveyard here at Kilsandan in Castlelyons and see for yourself some fine examples of 17th century memorials, probably the best in Munster.